Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello and welcome to Explain Like I'm Five. I am Susan. With me today, I have Irish Swede. How you doing, dude?
Good, because Nebraska is up by 10.
Woohoo! We are legit both celebrating this. So it's funny how like I was in band in high school, so I was always like, I really don't care about football. And then Nathaniel and I started dating, and now it's all like, okay, I can get into this. And I can follow this. I can understand this. And then you realize that it's Nebraska and
Yeah.
well,
You didn't pay attention during the glory years.
yeah. Yeah, I was also like, 7 and 8 years old
No.
during like the main like the 94, 95. So,
I
you
was
know,
a sophomore in 95, so yeah. In high
I
school.
yeah, I apologize. So, um well, let's start off with, see, you've been on our channel before. You were on with Nathaniel, sort of like around the election time.
Yeah, right
Was
when
it
Trump's
like,
tax returns got leaked.
yeah, yeah. So for those who aren't, haven't seen you on other streams and stuff, tell us a little bit about, like, I guess the TLDR, the opening TLDR of what we're talking about today.
Uh, there's a lot of confusion between what is a social democrat, what is socialism, what is communism, what are these political economies that people talk about and throw terms around, and uh, the boogeyman that
Mm-hmm.
is socialism, that gets thrown around a lot to scare people into behaving in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Just think of the language of politics as behavior control, and that's precisely the fear that people try to instill, because we still are ruled by Joseph McCarthy
Oh yeah.
from the
All the Red Scare.
1950s and 60s and the Red Scare. And
Mm-hmm.
if you think about, just how pervasive Stalinism is in American culture and how much we fear it, and it guides politics even today.
Mm-hmm. So, because I understand, like, the gist of each of the terms, but when it comes down to it, I could not actually define any of them. So hence the reason why I do not actually use them like I know what I'm talking about. Um, Socialism isn't when the government does things. I mean,
When the government does more things, the government is more socialister.
socialistist, socialistist. So let's start off. Let's start off by defining each of these terms.
So let's start with socialism. Socialism is the first one that people throw around the most, and no, it is not welfare. Socialism, by definition, is when the workers own the means of production. Otherwise, it can also be said as the democratization of productive capital.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it is. We have socialist institutions in the United States today,
Mm-hmm.
and they are called, workers' cooperatives, farmers' cooperatives. There's also public energy cooperatives.
Mm-hmm.
Central Nebraska is a customer-owned energy cooperative,
Ah.
whereas you have the Mid-American Energy, Warren Buffett-owned, Eastern Nebraska side. And really what it comes down to is, if I go to work for you, you are saying you are now part owner in this company. And a lot of this comes, and we have to back up even further, because why would we say we want to do this? And this comes down to the analysis of exploitation of labor. So if you hire me to, say, I become your Rainmaker salesperson, you are the one that makes the widgets, you created everything, makes the widgets, but I'm the one out gathering relationships and selling these widgets to people.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot pay me more than I'm worth. You cannot actually pay me what I'm worth either. Otherwise, there's no profit.
Right.
Now, in a place where there's two workers and both are working and they're paying each other fairly equally, you can get away with that. But when you start expanding this out and you have 50, 60, 70 employees, you can't pay people the revenue that they're worth. And sometimes the revenue that they're quote unquote worth isn't very easily discernible like a salesperson would be. You know, how do you determine the worth of customer service people? Because without that customer service, the guy selling the stuff to the customers is going to have a lot harder time if customer service ratings are in the toilet.
Right. And it's not like it's necessarily an exactly like measurable thing.
No,
like,
it's not.
It's not an objective sort of thing.
Yeah, it's not a we sell this for 17, we pay you $14 per one sold. Therefore, I'm exploiting you for $3, even though that's the most simple way to explain the concept. So the way you take that exploitation away is if I am part owner of the company, all profits benefit me as a worker. And so if everybody's owner, everybody's working, all profit, the profit motive then turns into a more collective situation. Now you still have a profit motive because there are schools of socialism that are very market oriented, and it wouldn't look anything different than it would today, except for there would be no stock market and all companies would be employee owned, which is, hey, cool. That's probably the first step beyond where we are today,
right?
As far as an increment would be. So socialism itself is just workers owning where they work. There are schools where it's not, it's quote unquote nationalized, and therefore there's no real profit motive there. However, for that to be considered socialism, there has to be full democratization and representation of all the workers. So you have to get to one vote, one person, and an equal share of voting across. Now, that doesn't mean federalism can't be in play, which, there are different hierarchies, but those hierarchies have to be very fragile. We have to, the hierarchy can't justify itself. The hierarchy has to be justified from the bottom rung. The poor have to go, that person who sits above us is thinking about the things that we all don't want to think about.
Right.
And then there's another layer on top of that who is kind of directing where things go. Now, those hierarchies can be instantly voted away, gone, reformed, whatever, if you had a true democratization of the state, and even in the workplace it could be the same.
Yeah.
But you're still going to have a general manager, you're still going to have some other financial managers and supply chain managers that are running things around, but those hierarchies have to be reformable or destroyable for it to be considered a quote unquote true socialism. And I don't really want to say that too much because it gets very into the no true Scotsman range. But when we get into this, and one of the links that will be in this is the Stanford Philosophical Dictionary of Socialism. It gets into this of, okay, if it is state controlled, here's kind of the framework it has to look like for it to be considered socialism. And now if we go to Soviet Russia, which was famously proclaimed by Stalin, the socialism experiment is now complete.
Right.
There was a political class which the underclass could not eliminate. There was without a secondary violent revolution. So the joke amongst us economists who side on the left is, where was Marx's true socialistic revolution, the second revolution that should have happened in Russia? That really would have moved the ball into where it needed to be considered a good socialist state.
Right.
So that's socialism, is participatory ownership in what you do. And what is ownership? We have to define that too, because ownership is very important. And what does it mean? It means you have sway over a resource. You can, if I own my house, that means I can decide when to sell it. It means I can refurbish, finish the basement. I can do things to it without seeking the permission of other people outside of specialized bounds that society has set towards us, such as construction guidelines, safety guidelines. I can't build a 3,000-foot cell tower in my backyard because my neighbors would certainly not like me at that point.
They'd probably flip their shit.
There are some NIMBY laws that you can get to, and NIMBY is not in my backyard. So it's ownership is your ability to control a resource, be it human capital, labor, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take a person who's owning where they're working, they then own their own labor fully. And that's the end goal of full self-actualization. You own your labor. You own the full fruit of your own labor. And then we get into Lockean philosophy versus Marx on where the ownership lies in that. But that's an argument that's kind of is this orange or slightly more red orange?
Yeah. And it's like when it's anything having to do with philosophy, I'm always just all like, okay.
I
just sort of sit there.
Trying to get Locke versus Marx on ownership of fruits of labor versus ownership of labor. What is labor but the result of it?
Mm-hmm.
And so you get a lot of these like, should we really be arguing about this type of arguments? And sometimes they're fun. Sometimes, they're 3:00 in the morning Village Inn arguments that are fun. They really don't belong in any productive setting.
Yeah.
They don't exist in anything that's productive.
It's like commission based versus like flat salary sort of argument. Like based on like commission, commission is like, well, this is exactly like the production of it realistically, sort of. And then, salary based is just, it's this all the time. Sort of, I guess. That's the way I'm sort of understanding it.
To get to communism, then you have to have a full elimination of class in all respects. So socialism is the elimination of economic class and political class. And then you have to eliminate any semblance of any class, of any hierarchical class in communism, where there's no more money, there's no more, where people fully democratize what is produced, why it's produced, where it goes after it's produced, and nobody owns anything anymore. Mm-hmm. I have a big problem with what communism is because I don't think people have really thought through how people treat things when it's not owned.
Mm-hmm.
Pride comes with ownership. As far as, to back up a little bit, economics is the study of human behavior when it comes to resources, and ownership really cements a person's desire to upkeep, improve something. Now, how it's owned and how society deems how something gets to be owned, totally open question. And that's where socialism tries to step in and answer that question. Capitalism has tried to answer that question. Feudalism tried to answer that question, all unsuccessfully to this point.
Yeah.
But you can't deny the fact that when I own this house, I want to keep it up.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is in a communist system where there's no ownership, where I don't have any real pride in where I live, now this may be a situation where it's based on the fact that I was conditioned this way within the system I'm in. So it's hard for me to think outside of that system, but
yeah, so, it's like the like owning a house versus renting an apartment thing. Like people are more likely to, trash an apartment all to shit because they're like, well, I'm just going to lose my deposit.
So what?
Yeah, like that's the.
Whereas if I trash my house, I lose $200,000 worth of value.
Yeah, you're incentivized in the system that we have now in order to actually participate in that upkeep.
Yep. And then there's the social democracy where everyone associates the Nordic countries. And that's not true. They're maybe in a way it can be true, but I haven't seen the real adherence to what social democracy is. So we get into Rosa Luxemburg with social democracy. She was the one that was assassinated in Germany in the 1800s. as to lead the social democracy. Social democracies are, we know capitalism exists. We acknowledge that capitalism exists. We acknowledge the fact that anytime somebody has tried to implement a new system, it's been bloody. It's been very bloody. There's been a lot of death in any other way, fascism, communism, socialism, whatever. Anytime you've tried to flip the script, it's ended up in massive death and massive inequality. Social democrats were like, let's not do that anymore. So they're not necessarily capitalists. They're not necessarily socialists, even though socialism is kind of their end goal, but they're what we would call incrementalists. What's the next step in working our way towards reaching, say, a market socialist society? And let's take this through the means of our present forms of government. Let's take this through the current bounds within our society to slowly change things as we go. Now that people have a problem based on the current climate situation, you could say, well, that isn't fast enough. But at the same time, we know that when you try to flip the script, Stalin happens. And that's, I'm not a big fan of that, as most people aren't.
Yeah.
I consider myself quite a bit of a sock dem who's on the syndicalist side, and think that the syndicalism is the way to do the incrementalist, which is a form of socialism. And there's 40 schools of socialism. And we're not going to get into all of them because there's a lot of them that are really weird. There's some of them that are really cool. Anyway, but long story short, if you want to learn about syndicalism, Chomsky is probably the biggest syndicalist out there right now. That if you want to listen to somebody who really knows everything about that. But it's basically the union owns the company, and all the workers own the union.
Okay, yeah.
And then eventually the use of unions eventually gets to the point where everybody ascribes to the international workers of the world, and we all strike and kick the owners out and become socialist at that point.
I can get behind that.
Non-violently. Syndicalism is a now non-violent, meaning no big single revolution. However, there will be if there are strike busters or anything like that, then things could get violent. We recognize that's, an egg may get broken here or there, but it's not our goal.
Yeah, it's like basically, even though he did, Martin Luther King Jr. did say the whole riot is the language of the unheard, I think he was still more on the nonviolent side than like Malcolm X was. Like that's what he's, was really going for. Well, Malcolm X was just all like, by any means necessary. Okay. So you said there's like the different sort of like really interesting versions of the socialism, and that really piqued my interest. So which ones are the ones that you find like sort of the most interesting, or like I guess the most feasible, or like
the most interesting, I think, are the beginning stage market socialism, where companies become employee owned through fiscal policy means. So fiscal policy is what Congress does. Monetary policy is what the Fed does. Federal Reserve. So fiscal policy would be some type of tax policy. So let's say we go to Bezos or Musk or and people like that and say, look, we're going to put a wealth tax on people that own more than, say, 10% of a company, which they fall into. And say, we're going to put a tax on you where we're going to tax you of the percentage of ownership of that company, unless you donate and transfer those shares directly to the employees. And you get a 1-to-1 tax credit for the value of those shares. Now, early on, there's a big incentive for that because they're going to get basically paid cash from the government to do this. But at the same time, they're giving control. They're democratizing the workforce.
Which
one of those shares is a vote.
Yeah. And realistically, they just want to maintain as much control as possible.
Now, if they can relinquish quite a bit of that control, then we can get there. And so you have to incentivize them to do it. Then that would be an incrementalist policy rather than, the eat the rich philosophy of that side. And then there's the union policy, which is encourage unionization of all workforces. However, some of our current union systems would not fall into this. The IW, International Workers of the World, wouldn't really suffice in this because the syndicalists don't really like a too big of a union because then you get the corruption of it, like the old auto unions had. The old stories of like the mafia and the unions, very true. It was ugly. And then some of the union abuses that happened that were true abuses, like sympathy strikes and things like that, really weren't productive for what they were trying to do. So you get, say, Ford has instead of the auto workers union, you have the Ford union, and General Motors union, or the BMW union for people that work within that. And everybody's a member from the bottom of the rung clear to the CEO. Everyone has to be a member, and then ownership starts getting transferred to that union, and nobody is a full-time, strictly only employee of the union. You have to be in the workforce to be in administration in the union. So you have to be a worker to affect the union. You can't have these boss fat cats that sit around all day, get paid to do nothing, as some have been caught lately doing this. So you try to make things in such a way so the cheaters and the fat cats can't sit back and still be lazy. But you could end up with a situation where the leader of the union is somebody who sweeps the floor on the factory floor. If people decide that somebody is that, but the CEO of the company would still be the guy wearing the suit trying to decide the direction of the company as far as and everything. But the union would still be led by whoever could come up with to say, hey, I'm on the other side, elect me, and we can have this dialectical situation where two opposing sides are trying to make each other see each other's side. So you get this true democratic sense of, we want to take a company this direction, but the workers are saying this. Have the clash.
Yeah. And you would think, I was going to say you would think that they would want to find a middle ground, but if the CEOs and, the higher ups are sort of like, well, we like where we are, we're not going to actually change anything, like regardless of how much pushback they get from the lower rung people, quote unquote.
And you could set these up however you like. You could set these up where you have the typical complaint of it's not fair for the great workers who produce a lot that they're making up for people that are either just generally lazy or bad workers or whatever. And it's kind of a lazy argument, but you can still get around of it through like different classes of shares. So you have one share per person. That's an A share, and that's your voting share. But B shares are handed out based on your productivity. And B shares are the ones that are your profit sharing percentages. So you could have people that are great, the great guy that keeps the floor clean gets a few more B shares and therefore gets probably more wealth than somebody who's, say, a middle management guy who's kind of sitting back resting on his laurels.
Yeah. Like they still have the same amount of like the voting power. It's just
that's you can cool. Split profits up differently.
Yeah.
Different classes of shares. You can do things. When people think socialism, they just lack imagination.
Yeah. And it seems like there's been a lot of thought that's gone into it.
There has been, and it's socialism itself has been thought of since the 1500s. Capitalism's been around since the 1200s, since its birth in Florence and Naples, and even, if you really want to get down, you probably say in the 800s in Venice. So these systems have been around for a long time. I mean, capitalism and feudalism came around at the exact same time, if you can believe it. So there's been this long line of traditions of these political economies, and so there's been a lot of thought into it. The problem is 1950, and when people generally became put into a situation where college education was much more prevalent, starting with people born in the 1950s and then afterwards. And then you see the curve basically take off exponentially of people getting educated. Well, people get pre-educated with the propaganda of what is evil, the evils of communism, socialism, everything else. We'll get taught about the Cold War, but we don't get taught why the Soviet Russian Civil War went the way it did and why things broke down. And even Lenin was like, don't ever let Stalin get any power. So they gave him a nothing position as the general secretary, except for the fact that he was able to finagle people to give the general secretary all the power. The office itself. So they really tried to stuff him in a closet so that he couldn't do anything.
And then he did all of it.
And then he had enough lackeys and scared enough people to have the powers that he wanted voted over to him, and then he could just assume total control.
Oh, bonkers.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have that much influence, and I mean, I would say charm, but I don't think that's necessarily the case.
He's a very shrewd individual. You could actually say he may have been a little bit charming, but at some point he turned over into just freakishly scary.
Yeah. As an only a mild have you seen the movie Death of Stalin?
Yes. And it is historically very accurate.
Yeah.
Except for the time compression that they had to do for a movie. And obviously, that's okay. Because it actually happened over years, right? More years than what they lead on. But it was very, very little of that was made up.
That's kind of amazing, because usually with stuff like that, and
Khrushchev was the joke man.
Nice.
He did. He told jokes and he wrote down which ones were good, which ones were bad, and that's how he stayed alive.
That's how he knew. Oh, that's so funny. And the fact that it's just like the most amazing cast ever. Like Michael Palin's amazing. But yeah, so are there any that are sort of like, I mean, other than, the one that was sort of the one we were just talking about, is there a particular one? Well, no, that one. I was going to say, is there a particular one that might be the most feasible? But that seems like it would be more.
It would be the easiest to transition to. The other is obviously a combination of public ownership through the state and then slowly phasing out capital through, private ownership through the workers.
Mm-hmm.
That gets harder and harder when you just have resistance to things. Now, obviously there's going to be resistance no matter which side of the coin you're on. But in reality, it depends on whether you want to look at this through the long haul lens or through a let's flip the script, let's be Jesus in the temple and flip tables over type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that are the flip the tables over to, the capitalists in the temple,
mm-hmm.
they're much more aligned with what is called on the Marxist side, which is the dictatorship of the proletariat, where you had this massive uprising, this instantaneous change of power, and this instant full democratization. The problem with that is I don't think we've reached a point where we can have that type of system organically form fast enough to stave away a vacuum of power that prevents Stalin, a Nikolai, what's his face from Romania, or Stalin, or somebody else from trying to fill that void. Because every power vacuum tries to get, suck somebody or something into it.
Right.
And you don't want that to get into an authoritarian situation. And if it becomes an authoritarian situation, then you've already lost. You've lost the point of the revolution to begin with, and you've lost the point of where you were trying to end up.
And it just ends up either the same or worse.
Yeah,
realistically.
And with the machines of killing that we have today, it would be worse.
Yeah.
And surveillance and everything else.
Yeah, and that's a big difference between Cold War and now. Is just so much stuff has advanced in that sense, and it makes it a lot scarier to think of it.
And with deep fakes, the state could create whatever evidence they wanted to rid themselves of their political opponents.
Yeah.
And then the other problem with revolution is that the idealists that start the revolution are usually the first to the firing squad. And so all the people that have the ideas are instantly purged to rid them, to get the power base, to rid the power base of any naysayers or anybody that wants to check them on which direction things are going.
Yeah.
Night of the Long Knives is another situation just like that. So it happens on the right just as much as it does on the left. And we're obviously talking in the extremes. And this is why I'm a fan of incrementalism, because incrementalism doesn't create this massive void within the course of a week or a month or something along those lines in which needs to be filled.
Yeah.
And imagine 350 million people trying to democratize themselves. It ain't happening in a week.
Yeah.
Some charismatic figure will step up and you'll end up with somebody that'll make you wish for Trump.
Yeah. Just like how Trump has made us wish for W.
Yeah.
Which is kind of depresses me every time I think
drone
about
strike
that.
himself, Obama.
Yeah. I think a lot of people I think a lot of people don't realize that there are a number of people who identify as Democrats, and I say that because both Nathaniel and I are not entirely aligned with the Democratic Party.
I have a term that you may like. We're harm reductionists.
That's good. We
don't necessarily follow. Now, there are some policies, incrementalist policies within the Democrats that we do like, especially with Bernie, Medicare for all and things like that. But we're not the always war, killing civilians. I don't think Democrats have still gotten away from their militarization of police and things like that. But at the same time, maybe they are. But yeah, there's still a lot, foreign policy issues that we would still, that aren't harm reductionist enough for us.
Yeah.
And to that end,
to align
to the left.
Sorry, I totally stepped all over that. Oh, what was that?
To that end, we're much further left than the Dems are, because I still consider the Dems to be center, very, very centrist right.
Yeah. I've sort of noticed that, when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, people who are considered, extremely liberal, and extremely left here in America are still, like you were saying, center right. So it's
yeah, people are asking, I ask people, who do you consider left? And the two obvious ones that come up are Bernie and AOC. And I just sit back and I say, if they are left, they are barely over the line.
Yeah.
Left.
Yeah.
Bernie's still a capitalist. AOC is still a capitalist. They use the word socialist, but they don't use it correctly. They don't use social democracy correctly.
Or democratic socialist, for that matter.
Or democratic socialist. Democratic socialism is the same as socialism. This is the one thing Crowder got right. The one.
The one thing.
Yeah, I mean, socialism has to be democratic.
Mhm.
I mean, so it's like it's ATM machine.
Oh god, yeah, or PIN number. It's like it's one of those sorts of things, it's like, "Oh
Uh-huh.
god, why?"
Yeah, yeah. So your situation that you're that they're using these terms incorrectly creates a situation which people need to be, and I hate to say re-educated because that is such a USSR
Yeah,
of a
it's kinda
term,
it's
but
kind of a
it is,
loaded
you
term,
have to
yeah.
break the stereotypes of what people
Mhm,
think things are. Sweden is not a sock-dem society. Sweden is privatizing at an alarming rate, especially
mhm.
their healthcare system.
Hmm,
Norway is closer because of their nationalization and the democratization of their energy revenues.
mhm,
But again, the rest, it's still entirely capitalist the rest of the way with no looking forward beyond that. There's
mhm.
no reform movement to do anything beyond that. They know their oil reserves are going to be out here in the next 150 years,
Mhm.
depending on drilling technology, but it's, they're not
Yeah.
moving in the direction to hand ownership over or even talk about that.
Yeah.
Finland isn't, Denmark isn't. I mean, they're very they're very welfare state. I mean, they're capitalist welfare states. That's what they are.
Hmm. Would you this the way that I was trying to phrase this so it doesn't sound like an alt-right conservative trying to ask a question of somebody who advocates for, the incrementalism and stuff. Has there been necessarily like a society, or would you say that there is, a society that has successfully achieved even the sort of basic ideas of socialism, or is like working towards that?
I don't think there has been yet because in my studies through my master's and what I want to do with my PhD is looking at the transfer of systems. So in the six, seven, 800s was feudalism. Now there was a spark of capitalism in the 800s, and it became more prevalent in the 1200s. But you didn't really get a true adoption of capitalism across multiple areas of Europe outside of Italy or the Italian peninsula that 15, 16, 1700s, you really didn't see it there. So there was this timeline of how many centuries does it take? And we're coming up towards where you would typically see the move away from the current system. So the 600s, the 6, 7, 800s to the 13, 1400s was the first reign of feudalism, where feudalism was just entrenched everywhere.
Mhm.
Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. You had it, in France, feudalism was entrenched clear into the 1800s or the late 1700s till the French Revolution.
Mhm.
Uh, Feudalism was Eastern Europe to a T. And then you had these weird two bastions of England and Italy where William of Orange walked in, became king of England, and then they switched over to capitalism. Bloodless coup. It was an amazing thing. When people say, capitalism rode in on the knife to the edge of a sword, it didn't.
Mhm.
And you can do this in such a way where you don't need to kill the dukes and the lords to make the transition. You just depower those particular people without making them feel they're losing their wealth. And yeah, they'll still be wealthy,
Mhm.
but their power is gone.
Yeah.
And then over time, that wealth dissipates. Um, we will see it eventually with the British crown. The wealth will dissipate over time. And it's the same with the Netherlands and their crown. They
Mhm.
still have a crown. It's just a head of state nowadays. It's a ceremonial role. The queen, I think it's the Queen of Netherlands. Still has kind of a Secretary of State role, as we would see it in the United States.
Mm.
But There's no real power there.
Yeah, like there's kind of no point.
There's a king of Sweden that is a ceremonial role that is kind of the head of state in a ceremonial role state, but I mean, like, no power,
Yeah,
none.
realistically. Yeah, it's
Like,
sort of like when you
they can't
buy.
even, like, the Queen of England could, if she had enough popularity, step in and nullify everything that's going on in England and the government in England right now, because all power still disseminates from the Queen to Parliament.
Right.
Sweden, that you don't even have that option.
Yeah, it's sort of like when you buy, like I've seen advertised on Facebook lately, if you buy like a square foot of land in Scotland and you can be a lord
Mhm.
of that land, it seems like that's sort of the same thing.
Mhm.
Like it's just in title only and kind of pointless.
Or buy a square inch on Sealand, which is a old oil platform in the
Oh,
North Atlantic, and you can be the Duke of wherever.
yeah. No, I kind of want to do that.
I
Maybe.
do too. I got $99 laying around somewhere.
Like I'll be able to afford it. It's fine. I can take the title. Now in terms of, so we went over like the the short term stuff that's vacuum. In terms of the long term stuff, that's I would assume that's more of the sort of incremental stuff in terms of getting.
It's very incrementalist. We're talking. You and I will not see the end game of this.
Mm-hmm.
As far as increment, the next step is obviously taking the profit motive out of what we in the economics world call inefficient industries,
Mm-hmm.
and those are healthcare, energy distribution,
Mm-hmm.
and some others like that. So you can think like the fact that we try that the right and others try to treat the economics of healthcare like consumer electronics baffles me.
Yeah.
They're very much in, these are the kind of, these act the same way, and they really don't. And one clear example is with my procedure, I didn't have a chance to shop around which doctor, which hospital, which doctor walked in and said, you're dissecting and we're sending you to Bergen and you're going to have heart surgery, whether unless you say no.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's either you have this or not, and $225,000 later, it was done. But it's this isn't like I'm deciding between LG and Samsung.
Right. Like there is a certain degree of necessity to healthcare.
Yeah,
Just a certain degree though, not that much.
I mean, there are some things you can shop around for. Yeah, I'm going to shop around for a dentist to do my root canal, type of thing. But at the same time, most dentists are priced around the same anyway, so you're not really going to get much movement. And these industries just aren't set up to be competitively based.
Right.
You're not going to have hospitals competing against each other, especially in emergency situations. They're all going to be working towards the same end goal. The University of Nebraska Medicine is going to have no problem if Bergen gets a patient because Dr. Langdon was at Bergen and he's the best heart surgeon in the city, and they're going to send people there no matter what. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And so you have an industry of insurance right now that you have the almighty dollar telling you whether you're going to live or die.
Yep.
You understand this just as much as I do.
Yeah.
And you have people that have necessary drugs. I have metoprolol, you have insulin, other people have other drugs that keep them alive. I have warfarin as well. And so it's a situation that it's either you have these or you die. And what would you pay not to die? And the inelasticity of that is so astronomical that it doesn't make sense to have these things be profit driven.
Right. Yeah. And what I've noticed because we have, I don't know what kind of network we have. I don't think it's a PPO. I don't know. Like even within the limited choices that we have here within our network. Like we have to go to like Kaiser Permanente facilities and we have to choose from these certain doctors and stuff, but they create this like illusion of choice.
Yeah.
Like you have some
I've had this discussion with my mom several times, and she's on Medicare, and I'm like, does Medicare have an in-network or out-of-network? No. Did your private insurance? Well, there you go. You have more choices with Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of
yeah.
And then it was a move the goalpost to something else.
Of course. That's always how it goes.
And here's how you defeat the "but there'll be waiting lines" argument. The mere fact that you're worried about a waiting line means that there's already sufficient demand to cause a waiting line if prices drop, which means that there already is a waiting line. It's just based on economic condition rather than, say, needs-based.
Right. And it's because this is one of the arguments, and because that's what I focus on is reproductive justice. One of the arguments against like criminalizing abortion is that low income pregnant people are always going to be are going to be the ones that are affected by this, because rich people are going to be able to travel, and if they need to get an abortion, they can just travel
to Denmark.
Yeah, like they can go somewhere else. They can go to another country. But a low-income pregnant person will not have that same choice.
So in economics, here's a way that you can think about how to defeat most right-wing arguments. Most right-wing arguments have a lot of assumptions to them. And like such as, well, just get a different job, or get somebody else to pay you more, or employers will fight for the best employees, which raises wages or whatever. And that's only true if certain assumptions are met. And those assumptions are, A, everyone can make it to the place of employment, easily.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone can afford car payments. Not everyone can get public transit. Not everyone, is on the public transit. Omaha is a shit public transit system. It also assumes that everybody's skills are set up in a way that they can compete with each other within a job scenario. And then there's also the assumption that that money is the only deciding factor within a person, because some people value the people they work with and want to keep that. They just want to be paid a little bit more for what they do.
Yeah.
That's worth a lot of money in some people's eyes, and in my eyes, I think of it pretty hardcore that way. And so you just think of, okay, how many assumptions do they need to make this work, to make what they're saying work? And a lot of things that they try to argue that require all these assumptions, you just find in the Econ 101 book, and they've never read anything beyond that, which is, pretty typical of a lot of things.
It's like, I mean, that's
I took a survey of Econ 101 in college, and now I'm the same as you, Mr. You've been doing this for 18 years and have 7 years of college behind you on this.
Yeah, they totally know the same amount as you do. Just those Google researches, that's totally as good as all of that student loan debt that you have.
and those 3 publicated papers I have, and
yeah.
Yeah, when people say they've done research, and for those of us that have actually had to submit a thesis.
Yeah, it's just like anti-vaxxers, where it's like,
do your own research.
I don't know. Yeah, it's like you didn't actually.
You didn't either. You consumed content.
Exactly. It's like you watched a YouTube video, which, I mean, thank y'all who are watching for watching a YouTube video, but that's neither here nor there. So you'd talked a little bit about communism, like just like a skosh in terms of like defining what it is. What would you say, and this is just sort of a funny question rather than like an informational one, what would you say has been the biggest like blow up in your face instance of like communism? Would you say it was like Soviet Russia?
To a point, yeah, because Soviet Russia ran into the same problem that we would run in today. if we tried to make a stateless, classless society, and that's the scarcity of resources. And people try to say we're in it. Resources are abundant. That doesn't matter. They're still scarce. Your time is scarce. Food is still scarce because we still have to get it someplace. It's perishable. There's still a limited supply of it. Now, it may be abundant, but that doesn't mean it's not scarce, because we're talking about the economic definition, not your colloquial definition. Same as theory. Theory. Exactly. When I say theory, sometimes I mean hypothesis.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people think of it more in terms of like the supply and demand part. Like they think that it's
there's more in supply than there is demand, so therefore it's not scarce. No, it's still scarce because demand could outstrip it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Breathable air is scarce in economic definition terms because there's a limited supply of it. We can't just create more than what we have available on Earth. So we have to get to a change in system where we can create matter out of energy, like the replicators on Star Trek.
Totally.
That would effectively mostly end the definition of what scarcity is. It would at least make it moot.
Yeah. It's totally feasible though. Totally.
We have to be able, and then the other problem is distribution of resources and deciding where resources are. So, how do you decide who gets lithium when it comes out of the ground? How much do you send to the battery makers? How much do you send to the pharmacies? How much do you send over here? And the answer in Soviet Russia was obviously central planning, quotas and everything else, and 5-year plans and all these things. And it just, if you're going to say we need X amount of toilet paper because it was the same last week and you have a cholera outbreak, you're going to have a bad time.
Invest in a bidet. Get a bidet and you're good. That's a good investment right there.
So, where people typically run wrong is they think abundance means scarcity is over. Abundance can turn into a shortfall very quickly.
Oh yeah, I'd imagine so.
And I use Africa as a great definition of this because Africa's has an interesting geographical problem, and this is true all over the continent. Here in the States, we have rivers that you can traverse almost the entire country within, say, 50 miles of a river. You can almost reach I think you can reach every major city and every minor city. So we have, and barge traffic is still a ton of resource travel up and down the river. We have the semi-truck system, but even then in rail, we have a great rail or a semi-great rail system, at least for cargo.
Semi-great.
But the thing that's missing for Africa is the river system. There just isn't everything is falls and rapids, and it's just not a great system to try and get around in. And then there's a place where there's a lot of people living where rivers just either they only exist 6 months out of the year, or they are mile wide and 6 inches deep, like the Platte River here in Nebraska, or they're just not great traversing of, you can't ship resources. So they become scarce. They could be abundant when we ship it to the coastal city, but getting it to the interior is just a massive problem.
Yeah, and that creates stuff like food deserts, like shit like that. So it just turns into a.
So you have to look at some people don't like geographic determinism. I'm actually kind of a fan of it because it doesn't matter if you're white and if you put Western European culture down in Africa, they would have the same problems. Doesn't matter. They would still be facing the same challenges that everybody is that there is today. It doesn't matter what race or color of skin is. It's just the geography gives you problems that are very hard to overcome in Africa. And that creates a situation where communism is very tough because communism depends upon the elimination of scarcity and total abundance. And that's
It presumes the equality of like distributing the resources.
and that just isn't. It just isn't. I mean, the United States is probably the closest we'll come to a country that could probably distribute resources in such a way. Western Europe, and that's just off the backs of everything that we've taken over imperialism over the last few centuries. But some of it has to do with our geographical ability to transport said resources. How are you going to get food from point A to point B is a pretty big question.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of logistics involved with it.
And it's a boring subject, but it has to be considered.
Right. Yeah.
So communism as a to each according to their needs, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs to be thought about very carefully.
Right.
In such a way of, can you provide to each according to their needs? And if you can't, without massive infrastructure investment that needs to be done first. Yeah. You have to think ahead of to each according to their needs way before you start getting into the from each according to their ability. And I think people go, no, we'll start with from each according to their ability. And that doesn't work because people starve. And you know what hungry people are attracted to? Strong men. Strong men that promise them a chicken in every pot. It's why Trump won 4 years ago, because he went to Michigan and Wisconsin when Hillary didn't, and he talked to them about food on their table. Food insecurity will change somebody's voting patterns real quick.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the smartest campaign move that I've seen in a while. And obviously it wasn't dreamt up by him. It was dreamt up by his campaign managers, but and the same has happened in Africa. You get strong men that talk to people about delivering them food, and all of a sudden they're the new dictator. And
it's the same thing with preachers. It's like the exact same thing with preachers. Realistically, like they're making
more advanced animals.
Yeah. Like people have such
literally.
Oh, apes. I wanted to point out before it scrolled up so much. Did they win?
Yes, they won by 10.
Wow. So Purdue didn't score again.
Nope.
Yay. I did not expect that, to be completely honest with you.
So Purdue beat Iowa beat Nebraska beat Purdue. Because reasons.
The circle of life.
The circle of suck.
It's like, oh, college football. Okay, well,
so that's the current issue that we would have with communism is we don't have the ability to get the to each according to their needs, and that has to be number one.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. Because if you go strictly based on, I feel like this is probably just reiterating what you were just saying, but if you go strictly based on how much a person can produce, if they can't, like you're saying, they're just going to starve if they can't produce, and their needs are greater than what they can produce, because you have people who are like people on disability and stuff like that who are unable to work, but they are still deserving of having a life that is,
or you're demanding work from them and you're not providing them any resources for which to feed themselves.
Yeah. Or any
that's where Russia really failed, especially early on. The Soviet Union was terrible at getting calories to the people.
Oof.
And later on it kind of balanced out, but at that point Soviet Union was too busy trying to fight proxy wars that they were bankrupting themselves.
Good times. Oh, Soviet Union.
I mean, the Americans were no different. It's just somehow we had the world currency, which is the only reason that we weren't screwed in the end.
Sounds about right.
So there's an economic concept called exorbitant privilege, what the US dollar has, and that's why we can print money to high heaven without inflation.
That makes sense. Yeah, just the words exorbitant privilege sounds like a very American.
So the world's current accounts, which means all the trade is done in dollars. So that means dollars are demanded. When dollars are demanded, that means the value is stabilized to a point where you're not going to have a devaluation of the dollar, which creates inflation that is, Weimar Republic level.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was actually, the coronavirus may have saved the US dollar from sending the United States into a depression. Because in February, the world shortage of US dollars to settle current accounts was 10 trillion.
Jesus. While it is a very astronomical number, we also have to think of it in terms of like how much.
As a percentage, it was about 10% of. We would, yeah. It's about, it was 5 to 10% of the total US dollar in circulation.
Yeah.
M2 money supply.
Yeah. It's sort of like thinking about billions of years. Like, it seems like it's a huge amount of time, and millions of years and thousands of years and stuff. Like, they seem like such amounts of time that we can't necessarily wrap our heads around it, because it's a concept that we can't quite understand.
I always like how much would you have to spend one day over 100 years, per day over 100 years to spend $1 trillion? And it's just stupid.
It's still a lot of money. All right. Well, we're just at about an hour. Do you have any closing thoughts? Any closing remarks?
Be very careful about what you believe from politicians and what they're trying to use to scare you. Everything they're telling you is to get you to believe and think a certain way. And that's not always bad. Sometimes they're actually trying to educate you on how things are. Like when Bernie talks about, something costing $30 trillion, but the way we're currently doing it is going to cost you 50 trillion. So don't think of it in terms of the 30 trillion, think of it in terms of the 20 trillion savings. Things like that, they're obviously on the positive side. On the other side, they're trying to give you boogeymen to fear. And fear is how people control you, because 500,000 years of evolution, fear is what kept us alive.
Yeah. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate.
It leads to suffering. That is the path of the dark side. So if you want some good books on this subject,
spotlight you so you can
spotlight these. See this debt, the first 5,000 years. You have to be very careful with this particular book. About half of it is horse shit. The other half is very good, especially when it talks about capitalism and some of the things that have happened within the capitalist system and the World Bank and some of the other events that have happened that have been extremely negative. It's a great reference on that side. There's some other claims that this guy makes that are absolute bunk. So you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. One of the best is this one. Schumpeter is an Austrian economist. Now, some of the left would scoff against that because Austrian economics is the libertarian style philosophy, except for he's the sole Austrian economist who said socialism is unavoidable. At some point, it will rise. He's also the creator of the phrase creative destruction. When somebody invents something new, it destroys a lot of old businesses and burns away some of the old, habits of doing things. And he gets into this. This is also a great reference on tempering your expectations with democracy itself. Mm-hmm. Democracy has flaws, so don't think it doesn't. Any popularity contest has flaws, and that's what democracy is. And never underestimate the power of stupid people in groups.
Exactly.
And then obviously, for a great view of how to value work, I used to think that this was probably the most evil book ever. And keep in mind, I went to a right-wing Jesuit school.
Oh, you did, yeah.
Yeah. So my views are very antithetical to where they're, but professors couldn't argue against it when I was writing papers and stuff that was like, yeah, you are exploiting labor.
Yeah.
It is what it is. So these are the three books that I would say. Now, if I had to pick one, this is probably Schumpeter's book. It's the most recent out of them that has been updated. And it's the most equal-sided there are some points on the right economically that do work.
Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter is they only work with certain things and in very specific circumstances. And in those circumstances, using right-wing thinking is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Just limitations. Some pretty extreme limitations.
so but it's at the same time, the amount of the economy that works with is still huge, though. Consumer electronics is still a huge part of our economy. So we have to think about things like that. But when you think about inefficient industries, you have to kind of change your mode of thinking in how you can't compare TV shopping to shopping for a surgeon,
right?
Which is a right-wing problem up and down the aisle.
Yeah. There.
So I would suggest those. There are others, but really, I mean, you're going to get the gist from everything else. And then with the link to Stanford's paper on socialism itself, you'll get it. It does a great job of saying, okay, yeah, you can have state-owned everything, but here's the situation that it has to work under, and that's true democratic representation of each person.
Cool.
So yeah. I would highly recommend that. That's actually what I cut my teeth on at the very beginning, was nice. That particular paper itself. That's what actually changed my mind about what socialism actually was.
Oh, nice. So that's I have a feeling that's going to be a very, very in-depth but very good read. So cool. I like it. This was a fascinating conversation. I'm not even going to lie to you. This is stuff that I was telling Nathaniel earlier. I was like, so I understand, but I can't define, like I said at the top. And I very much feel like I have a far better grasp on this. So thank you for genuinely explaining this like I'm 5 years old. Because there's sometimes that I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on. You broke it down in a very, very understandable manner, and I really, really appreciate that. So do some shilling out. Where can we find you?
I am the Irish Swede on YouTube. There will be a link below to my channel where I try to do nice, short 5 to 30-minute videos to demystify economic concepts and what politicians tell you versus what's actually the truth. I have a ongoing series which has 2 parts so far, but I'm working on my 3rd, which is Lies Your Politician Tells You. And then the other side is I try to take something that's topical at the time for instance, people want to ban fracking. And so I get into why fracking can't be banned for the next 200 years at least. Mm-hmm. And it's probably cost me some left-wing cred, but my heart valve is made out of petroleum product. Are you really going to tell us that we can't use petroleum products anymore?
They have to take your heart valve out then? I wonder.
So there's the amount we depend upon on our everyday products, from the computers we use to everything else that is petroleum based, is just in our medical pharmacy systems.
Creative destruction.
We would have to have
a solution.
Substitutes.
Yeah.
For all of those.
Yeah.
And they're being made, but we have to wait. Mm-hmm. Again, you can't put the cart before the horse.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good.
And you can find me on @Swede_Irish on Twitter. Yes, and send me a DM if you have a question. I will answer it to the best of my ability.
I like it. It's awesome. I love it. So that's going to do it for us today. Thank y'all so much for watching. Thank y'all so much for joining us in the chat. We really, really appreciate y'all. If you would like to subscribe to Swede, his links are below. Follow him on Twitter, all that stuff. You can support Divine Disbelief on Patreon. It's patreon.com/Divine Disbelief. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook. We have Instagram. I never post there. We got Podfan, Buy Me a Cup. You can send us money in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Realistically, if you want to send us money, it's fine. But yeah, thank y'all so much. Really appreciate it.
You want to donate money to me for what I do? Donate it to them.
Nah.
I'm doing very well for myself, so I don't need it.
Well, thank y'all. And thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Thank y'all. Y'all have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, guys.